With the world forever torn by violence, ignorance, and war, leading millions to pivot from tired ideologies and broken dreams toward new thinking, this is Neon Galactic. I'm James Falk. Thanks for joining us. The age of UFOs is rife with resonances that call back to ancient mystical traditions. The truth has long been with us, hiding amid the rubble of authoritarian structures of power-hungry people who've arrogantly abused those visionary ideas to build dogmatic empires. The UFO, meanwhile, is a revolutionary force. It confronts us with numinosity, transforms perspective, and exposes dogmatism to the blistering light of fresh revelation. Our guest today, Yoni Shadmeh, is an Israeli podcaster and progressive thinker who highlights the connections between UFOs, UAPs, and the Jewish tradition, courageously challenging the cultural biases and simple prejudice that have turned the Palestinian region into such a maelstrom of conflict. Host of the Second Temple podcast, conducted in Hebrew, he's a teacher of the Torah and a scholar of his people, someone who's been avidly observing the latest eruptions of numinosity into human society and working to fan those bright embers into flames. One such story from Israeli experiencer Mayo Zinan chronicles how an orb, what he calls a star of peace, appeared to him shortly after the murder of both his parents during the October 7th attacks. Since then, Inan has been on a sojourn to heal the deep rifts between the Jewish and Palestinian peoples, charged by his cosmic visitor to undertake a mission of peace. The miraculous occurrence is, of course, the kind of moment we cover here on Neon Galactic, but the fascinating part of this particular story is its acceptance by the progressive side of Israeli politics. Rather than rejecting the anomalous incident on materialist grounds, they've been galvanized by the visionary. So what can we, as advocates of a new paradigm, learn from this? Is it just a convenient exception or the protracted birth of a new dispensation? Welcome to the show, Yoni.
Thank you, James. That was a wonderful intro. It's just, I could listen to this forever for you
Well,
describing reality.
I appreciate that, man. I try to take my time with those intros and portray my guests' thinking as best I can. You are a deep thinker and someone who has been following these topics for a while, and it's my pleasure to have you on the show. We're here to talk about a number of things, including the current, political, military situation in Gaza between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Visionary experiences that people are having and what those are helping guide people toward, if that's a new kind of evolution that they're exploring now, and how all that relates to the human experience, like you were mentioning before the show, that sense of exile that we all seem to have. Um, let's start though from the beginning. Who are you, and what is your? I mean, you're a podcaster. You're someone who's a communicator. You talk with a lot of really, frankly, brilliant people on your show about these issues. What is your mission in this space?
Wow. Who am I? Um, I think, well, basically, I'm a Torah teacher. That's like my day job. That's what I do most of the time, every day except Shabbat, sometimes also on Shabbat. And I think like one way to go into this is it just happens to be that the days that we're recording. Um, so here's what my day was like. It started with meeting, boy, already I'm a dear friend of mine who was kidnapped. Um, just a hostage, a former hostage that was recently released. And we
Gosh.
spoke about, yeah, I met her and her partner in her partner's apartment, and we spoke for a few hours about what she's been through. Like serious stuff. She's very brave and very funny, and her stories really kind of relate her personality with her captors, and a kind of almost friendship with one of the guards, and also torture and really dark stuff. Oh, this was like I have two daughters. I put them in school. They're 7 and 8. I put them in school. Then I went to my friends, to her partner's apartment, and we talked. Then I went to my studio in Tel Aviv, where I have the Torah learning sessions, which are I'm a teacher, but there's a certain thing, the way that you study Torah is very collaborative. It's called the chavruta. It's very kind of equal. So this woman I'm studying with, and we went into something we'll maybe go into later, the Kabbalistic concept of chesed, of usually translated as kind of loving kindness. So still being under the impression of the conversation with my friend, I went into loving kindness with that woman, and we had like a good session about how to receive it, not how to give it. So that was that, and then I just had coffee in a great coffee shop near Rabin Square in Tel Aviv. Rabin, named after the prime minister that was killed there by a Jewish accession. And I had coffee with my friend, and birds are chirping. And it was good. And by the way, it's owned by two Palestinian sisters, Palestinians who live in Israel. Great little coffee shop. And then I came home and I tidied up around here, and I was thinking of you and of our conversation. And I spoke with one of my daughters. They're at her mother's now, and then another with the other daughter. And as I was thinking about your work, James, and about what's going on with experiencers and the sort of personalities that's coming forward to lead the conversations like you, I was feeling kind of thankful, really, and thinking of the really dark apocalyptic times, obviously. And I would add that, like, last night, let's see, so the night before last night, 2 Israeli soldiers killed and buried. Then last night, 61 Palestinians killed. I don't know if they were buried horrifically. Women, children, like many nights. Also, we had like a bomb siren here. The girls were sleeping. This was around 11 p.m. And everyone knows what to do. We get up quickly and we go down to the bomb shelter here, meeting the neighbors. That was actually not so bad. Some camaraderie there. And that's like 24 hours. And then, there's, let's say, your podcast. And my work, the Torah session I did with the friend, with the chavruta I'm studying with. And it can seem kind of small. It can seem like too little, but it's not. It's not. Like, you have, I think, more than 100 episodes by now. And I was thinking how, like, your voice and presence, and you obviously don't even know about it. This is the first time we talk, kind of really helped me in a very practical, real way to be remembered of this chesed, which this loving kindness thing, which according to Kabbalah is at the very basis of existence. And then one thing that Kabbalah is really good at is taking these huge concepts of, light and soft, the very, very high gods, the things that, very advanced mystics come into, and then marrying it, and sometimes in a way that's very physical, into our actual everyday experience. And I think, as I was kind of praising your work and really remembering, wow, he's doing a really good job. And I was saying, oh, but the more difficult thing is actually to feel that way about myself, my work, and to understand it as significant. And despite the horrors, despite the deaths and the kidnappings, just being connected to these things that's very real and really supporting people. So those are the last 24 hours. That's what I have. Yeah.
Wow. That strikes me. One of the things that we hear about a lot in the subject, and these sort of, this cloud of subject matter, is the role of trauma in kind of turning people on to the numinous. And it strikes me that there is probably no more traumatic region in the world right now than where you're currently living. And I wonder, can you talk a little bit about what the impact of that trauma has been, both prosaically on people's lives and how they, interact with one another and their communities, but then also, which is something hopefully we can talk more about as we go on, is how that's pushed people to explore other realms as a means of either coping or of transcending sort of the weakness of the world.
Sure. That's beautiful. Well, I think so. I'm an Israeli. I'm enjoying what I like to call a temporarily luxurious apocalypse. Like, I had coffee today. The cake was good. had a nice dinner before our talk. And then really just, not a lot of kilometers, 20, 30 miles from here, there's like a Mad Max hunger hellscape in Gaza. So, my lived experience is my lived experience. That's what I'm experiencing. And this trauma, like you can describe it in all sorts of different ways, but there's sort of I'm looking for a minor way to describe it actually, which has to do with vibe and atmosphere in let's say the streets of Tel Aviv, where I was today and where I'm every day. Definitely a lot of fear. There are some, let's say, hedonistic end of the world vibes, but also I think some humility, more humility than before. And I think there was something about the Israeli character which ties back into very ancient, I would say, Jewish culture, that has like its light side and its dark side, like everything else. And when it goes dark, it's quite vain. It stops listening, and it can become really proud. And that had actually shifted. And I'm not saying that this is okay. So it's a good reason to have a bloody war, but I feel in the streets of Tel Aviv actually more kindness, more people are more humble than what they used to be. And this tied into the nominos and to the kind of questions being explored here. Because one of the things that I do is I kind of like to joke that I'm kind of Haaretz writer for weird stuff. And Haaretz is like Israel's paper of record, or it sometimes gets compared to the New York Times. And it's I love them. It's a vital living institution. And they're like all of us are just, at shock at everything that's going on. And they're doing great work. And they're also maybe like the Times quite like rational people, right? And there's a strong vibe of rationality in Israeli society going back to 48 and even before that. And now I think people are more open to asking questions. And I want to give credit to the editor there because I write about UFOs there. I had like a major cover story about UFOs. This was before October 7th, but already there was some sort of growing panic and fear in the air. And there was a new openness. And I interview people that you know very well and were on your show, like Lou Elizondo and Jeff Kripal and the amazing Leslie Keane and the wonderful Ralph Blumenthal and others. And there is a new opening to that sort of way of thinking. And I think one way to look at what's going on is that we, as progressive left, has been a little bit proud. We thought we understood the universe. And in my own personal process, which is I would say, about a decade into it, just saying I don't know, that has been like a great gift. And knowing that I know far less than I used to. So I guess that's one good thing that's coming out of the trauma, and it has some relation to ontological shock. Mm-hmm. Because October 7th was an ontological shock, for sure. In the sense that people didn't think it was possible. And, I remember this was like, I was in a different apartment. I was with the girls. It was on Saturday. And the day started with bomb sirens, which was unusual back then, but not entirely unheard of. And I was thinking, yeah, there's some sort of skirmish in Gaza. And I woke up, it was like around 6. And okay, I told the girls, let's go to the safe room because every Israeli apartment, a new apartment, needs to have a safe room, which has like all sorts of gadgets for nuclear war, for example, to purify the air. And by the way, we don't have that here. We have a bomb shelter here, which I kind of prefer because of the social context to it. But we went into the safe room and I looked at the cell phone waiting for it. Okay, let's see what's going on. And then things obviously very quickly deteriorated. And the thing was that I live in Givatayim, which is like a suburb of Tel Aviv. And the Hamas people, they came, I think it was like about 40 minutes drive, let's say, from my home. They were able to get really deep. And that's the kind of thing changes you. It takes time, but it changes you. And I think that's sort of what we're witnessing here. We're witnessing sort of the rapid shift, relatively rapid in a way, it's not nearly as rapid as it needs to be. The rapid shift of a society, and most of it is very bleak. And we can go into it how the Israeli extreme right wing is operating and what to do about it. But there are also good things going on. There are small groups which I'm not sure they're enough to stop the apocalypse. I mean, Netanyahu may lose the next elections, but the long-term demographic trends in Israel are quite worrying. But if we look at Jewish history, we can find some hope for the future. And I don't expect any Palestinian to take any sort of joy in that and the Jewish learning journey. But I mean, that's one thing that's helping me. Seeing those small groups, someone like Maoz Inon coming seemingly completely out of left field with this classic experiencer story, and then being able to take it to the Pope and to take it, for example, to Germany. And really, he kind of helped stop some arms shipments to the IDF. The guy, this experiencer who met an orb in his bedroom and the orb told him about peace, was able to very rapidly translate it into sort of real political good stuff. So that's one thing to take hope in, I think.
Yeah. That's interesting because there's a contrast there between, I mean, it sounds like, and please, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a situation where there is this awakening to spiritual ideas there, but there's almost also a competition between how people are going to take that awakening and whether people are going to pivot toward more conservative or isolating strands of like radical theologies, or whether they're going to open up to sort of the numinosity, like you mentioned. How engaged should we be as a community in trying to stake a place in that argument, or to try and recruit people? I mean, is that our
Who's
role, do you
the
think?
who's the we in that question? Like how do you understand it?
Well, just I mean, in terms of because I see it also. I mean, and maybe that's an assumption I should avoid, but I see it all as a part of a global struggle, the meta crisis, where we're all kind of caught up in this moment where either we pivot away from the uh, you know uh, vehemently capitalistic and sort of just the world that we're living in that's teetering on the edge of destruction, and move towards something more holistic and potentially spiritual through a phenomenon like UFOs, or
Mm-hmm.
we don't and we end up going off the cliff. And I see, I guess, Israel and Palestine is kind of emblematic of that overall situation, although much more accelerated. So that's what I meant by we.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I love that perspective. I love that perspective. It's like it's dense with meaning, I think, which is an important thing. So okay, so it's obviously a very big question. And I think maybe we can kind of I can present the situation as I understand it, and then maybe you can help me understand what what's the relevance of this
Yeah.
outside of Judaism and outside of Israel and Palestine. Um, okay, so the way that I understand this is as follows. So about 10 years ago, I kind of just honestly, I made enough money. I had like a small tech company, and I said, okay, I made enough money, and I rented a garage, an empty garage in Bnei Brak, an ultra-Orthodox city, not too far from here, a big garage, and I cleaned it up. And going into it, my thought was I could feel kind of the crisis in the liberal left. I thought about it politically back then, not so personally.
Mhm.
And I said, well, I'm interested in trying to do something about that. And I wasn't sure what I'm going to do. And I went in there and I painted a lot. I painted on the walls. I danced a lot. I cried. And I read a lot. I read a ton. And slowly it became focused on two things, UFOs and Judaism, my reading. And and then there was a long process. Maybe I'll go back into it, but there is something in this current moment where one side of the political map has like a really intense, intimate relationship, the far right, with both mysticism in the everyday life and scripture and sacred text. And you can see it like in ice commercials. Ice, the American ice, they have these commercials where, with quotes from Isaiah, for example, the prophet.
Yeah.
And they're impressive commercials to me, like ads. And so in the Israeli example, we have the far right. It's a small group. It's a fairly small group of very religious people. I would say there are no more than, let's say, 10,000 people, and probably hardcore is even a smaller group. And I think the first thing as progressive we need to acknowledge is how effective they are. This small group is just making the world turn towards what they want. And I found myself very impressed with their effectiveness because they're not well educated. Famously, like one representative of that group is a man named Bezalel Smotrich, Israel's finance minister. And there's a lot of jokes about him not knowing English. And he kind of, in one of his early speeches, when he still had anything to do with finance, that's not his focus at all, but he called NVIDIA, like the most valuable company in the world, he calls them Nvidia. He has no idea about anything. And yet, all of us educated, smart people, he's leading us. We're doing his bidding. And it's not just in Israel. It's the world. It's Trump. It's the US military. Possibly the greatest, military force on earth is doing the bidding of this very small group. So I think a good starting point, speaking of being humble, is asking how can that be? And how, us, however we conceived us and we, with all our brains and all our resources, we're kind of powerless against them. So this small group has, I think, a very deep understanding of something very deep, not just in kind of the Jewish soul, but human soul. And that has to do with exile. Yeah. And when you go, let's say, to the West Bank, where most of these people are, they're sometimes called hilltop youth because it's all hills in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria. And they're kind of living off the land, kind of wild. And then there's also the organizational people, and there's the radical rabbis who are very much into Kabbalah and write in Kabbalistic terms. So they understand something very deep, I think, about the feelings we all have about being not foreign here. There's something about humans, I think, especially humans, like you said, in our current civilization, which is kind of a distance. We created a distance from just being alive, from our bodies, from the earth, from, I would say, God, without kind of taking that word too seriously for now. Just a distance. And there's a sort of a denial of that distance. And I think it's a universal feeling. There's a famous letter by J.R.R. Tolkien, who he speaks about how nature, even in its most pristine form, even in its most relatable form, has a deep sense of exile in it for us humans. And by the way, that letter is quoted in the great book by Robin Lassiter, who's been a guest on your show. Yeah. And I consider a teacher and a friend. So
Earth, a Love Story is her book, right?
Yeah, Earth, a Love Story. I highly recommend it, and I highly recommend Robin in general. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about her, because I want to try and paint like a structure built by the far right, a mystical structure that's so effective. Myth is so effective in driving people that even without education and without knowing English and with all their shortcomings, plus, a monstrous kind of vision, it's working out. It's working out, and we're all at their bidding. So what they're saying is this. They're saying, look, we know about this exile thing that all of us humans feel. That's the first thing. The second thing they're saying is this: us Jews as culture really delve deep into what does exile mean in the last 2,000 years. Like you mentioned, my podcast is called The Second Temple, and that's a temple that was destroyed 2,000 years ago. And in Hebrew, temple means home. It's called home. It's called bayit. So they're building this story where they have a solution to what I would say is one of the most fundamental problems of being alive, and I feel it in my body, this distance from us and the world. And the solution is a greater Israel, a much bigger Israel, physically, just occupying more land, destroying the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Islamic mosque in Jerusalem, and rebuilding.
Hugely holy site for
Islamic people. Very holy, very important, like for any Muslim. Destroying that and building upon it the third temple. And if we're honest about these sacred texts, they have a lot to work with, because Jews took all their sense of exile and all their longings and just poured it into Israel, the physical land of Israel, and especially into the temple. And there was this sense, this messianic sense in the building of Israel. And the builders of Israel, the original ones, were extreme secular. They completely disregarded that. And I got to say, these are kind of my grandparents. I grew up in kibbutz Kfar Blum, a kibbutz which is kind of close to the Lebanese border and the Jordan River. And my grandparents, they built it. They were there before the country was founded. They were what used to be called the pioneers, chalutzim. So they were very secular, and they were very intelligent, and they knew their Judaism, let's say, but they were secular. And then the far right understood that the messianic longings that belong to the building of Israel, they can be kind of utilized. And there's possibly the most important researcher of Kabbalah in the 20th century, Gershom Shulem, wrote about it and warned about it in the 50s. And he spoke in the context of Hebrew. I don't know if people know, but Hebrew wasn't a spoken language for 2,000 years. And part of the Israeli project was reviving Hebrew. Like my grandparents spoke Yiddish before they came here. And then they decided as a society, no more Yiddish, no more Arabic for people who came from Arabic-speaking countries, from Jews who came from there. We are all now speaking Hebrew. And it kind of worked. I'm speaking Hebrew. My daughter speaks Hebrew. But Gershom Shulem, the Kabbalist and the academic researcher, he warned, he said, look, there's explosive there. That was the word that you used. He said, you can't bring the language alive without that sort of just explosive inside it. So they're saying, look.
Fascinating. I mean, that is such a, if we look at how people construct reality through their use of language, even how their minds work is often shaped by language, and so that is just profoundly important, I think. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I agree, and thank you for pointing that out. And Professor Jeff Kripal from Archives of the Impossible, I know he ascribes great importance to language, and he thinks a lot of the sort of, let's say, parapsychological or supernatural stuff has to do with language. So that's certainly like a case in point. So the way that they're describing, the far right, the way they're describing the return to Israel is like, okay, so this was the first phase. The secular pioneers came here. This was the first phase in the project, in the sort of divine project. Now comes the next phase where kind of Torah takes over, where we become holy, where the secular laws will be replaced by religious laws, and the rule of democracy will be replaced by the rule of what they call the tzaddik, which is like a Hasidic term that they kind of turn towards themselves. They're saying, okay, we're the tzaddiks, those rabbis, and we're going to control Israel, and we're going to lead us to the destiny. And I know all that sounds kind of ridiculous, and it is, but I think that in the basic longing that they're connecting to, and I read their text, and they just hammer on this point again and again, and in a way that's effective and really takes us, at least to me, to childhood. And I want to ask James, and if it's okay, and if it's not, you can cut it. But things like emotional distance, and I know a little bit about your biography and, the kind of challenges you faced. And how do you feel this exile thing? We kind of mentioned it. Do you feel it in your body? Like, where are you with it these days?
Yeah. Well, the reason why I do this show is precisely for that reason.
Wow.
And I think that for me, it crystallized during the COVID-19 pandemic when everything kind of slowed down and I was forced to turn inward because we weren't leaving the house. And my reading at that time kind of got more mystical, and I got into UFOs a lot more than I had been previous. And I basically gave myself permission in that moment to put aside the biases that I'd been raised with in terms of materialist society, and tried to, find a way in to, a holistic view of the earth and myself and my spirit and my children and all of it, trying to see it as a unitary thing that was something I belonged to rather than something I was taking advantage of or merely living upon. I
Mm,
basically I talk about it like I became a part of the earth being rather than being a human on earth. Like I recognize that we're all kind of cellular, segments of this overall unit that is earth, and then by extension the cosmos, and that led me to a lot of mystical ideas and texts and whatnot to try and kind of put some language to that. So it's helping, and I have a strong meditative practice now that I conduct, or whatever you want to say. And I've had some real progress, especially recently, trying like finding peace there. Uh, but I I mourn for society more broadly because I don't see that pivot happening as fast as it needs to. And so that's my goal in this show, is to help foster those conversations and give people the permission to rethink their place in the universe and our role as beings here. And even if that leads to, opinions and, ideas that are outside the mainstream of physicalist, Western culture.
yeah. Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I love how you started it at COVID. And I think for this to work, it can't be a marketing ploy. It can't be a marketing. We can say, well, whatever, those religious fanatics are destroying everything. Let's find a better way to talk about our stuff. It has to become from within. It has to be this
Yeah.
internal thing. And this is what we started with, that people who knows about loneliness, either through childhood or other experiences, who know about fear, who know it in their bodies, speaking of traumas, they have a role to play here
Hmm.
because they know about exile.
Yeah.
They know, and this gives a sort of advantage because it's not a theoretical thing. Um, so yeah, so this compelling, authentic story that the far right is telling, and it's working. It's taking the world, by storm. So I want to suggest a different story, or sort of what my experience was. And so, like I said, I was in this car garage in Bnei Brak like a decade ago, and I studied Judaism, I studied UAP, I wrote about those things. I started teaching in an Orthodox synagogue in Tel Aviv, with two friends, with Elishav Rabinovich and Dr. Yair Berlin, who's now studying in Oxford. He's studying the emotional impact of Torah study. And we taught a weekly lesson there. And I thought I had it figured out. I mean, I thought, yeah, UFOs, Judaism, mysticism, all those things are connected. Let's go for it.
Hmm.
And it's okay. So how am I technically going to go for it? I was thinking. And then two things happened. I found my two teachers. And the first one was Robin Lasseter, who was on your show. And the way that I found her is that she was on this podcast, Aliens and Artists, by Stuart,
Mm.
a great podcast, Aliens and Artists. You can look it up. And I listened to her. And again, this was a long time ago. And today I drive mostly by bicycle, but back then I was driving a car. And I had my two daughters in the back, and they were little, and they don't speak English. So I played the sort of podcast where I thought the voice it would be kind of conducive for them, would be positive for them. And I would kind of think of different podcasts. Is this appropriate for the car or not? And it's in English, and they don't understand, so I can listen to all sorts of stuff. And I listened to Robin's interview there, and my eldest daughter is named Zohar, which means splendor. It's from the Book of Splendor, like the basic book of Kabbalah. Um, and I don't know how old she was. I think probably 4, maybe a lot less even. And Robin on that podcast, he spoke like 2 sentences. And Zohar rose from her child's seat in the car and said, Dad, who is that? Who is that woman? Because she sent something. So I reached out to Robin. If people don't know, she lives in this home she built herself out in a forest in Colorado. And she's a very special person. And I reached out to her and we started exchanging these really long voice notes that I would listen to as I would walk around my old neighborhood. And she started teaching me. She started teaching me, in retrospect, I understand. She started teaching me and I had the ideas pinned down. And I thought, okay, so it's just about kind of implementing them. But this was the beginning of the real education because it became personal. It became my body, my family, my life in accordance to those great theories and principles that I read about. And then quite naturally, I found my second teacher, which was an Israeli. Her name is Michal Koenig. I don't think there's anything about her online. And the way that I got to her is I have a friend of 20 years, which I saw transforming himself through, like, with difficulty, but with great talent and beauty and love through a few years, like a transformed person, but he's still the guy that he was. And by the way, this is the guy that I met for coffee today that we started with. Mm-hmm. And I was very impressed with him, and he told me about her. And I started meeting with her, and this is when stuff became real. This is when stuff became real, and she wasn't that interested in my theories about the world or about God or about UFOs, but just in my everyday experience. She's like a great advocate of the inner child, let's say. And then again, so that's where my real education began. And I'm still with them, with these 2 women. They're my teachers, as far as I'm concerned, today, like in a very close connection. And then through their help and through a lot of reading and through a lot of teaching and learning with people, I think, I found like a real sort of different spiritual path that's about exile, that's about the thing that obviously I was feeling. The reason that I'm so connected to it, I was feeling it, and I didn't even know it. That's part of it, that you're kind of walking half alive or half awake most of the time. And that's still the case, if I'm honest. But maybe I'm a little bit more awake than I used to be. So you're finding out new things about yourself and about your life and about your choices. And it's very real and it's very difficult. Especially when you start it at a later age, where, I've made a lot of choices in life already, which impacted me and people around me. And this resembles AA, I think, kind of, or NA. You're faced with, honestly, like the damage you've done to yourself and to others. Yeah. So through the help, Michal was great at this because she really insisted on what's real, what's really working for you. I remember one time I came to her and I did like the Jewish blessing on a cup of water, a great blessing. And I did it. And then she kind of stopped me and she said, what are you doing? What is this? And through her lens, I could see, I wasn't really practicing the thing. I wasn't really, and it's not that she has anything against it or she's all for spiritual practice, but it has to be real. It has to be within the body. And that really helped me. That really kind of made things more and more real and concrete. So through this process and through the study of Jewish history, I started seeing really strong parallels between now and 2,000 years ago. 2,000 years ago with the temple, there was a group of fanatics that the Romans were kind of laying siege to Jerusalem and to the temple. And a group of Jewish fanatics, they didn't want any compromise. They were very, very staunch. And not only did they not let people in, they didn't let people out. And they also burnt the food supplies, their own food supplies, the Jewish food supplies, because they wanted people to be desperate. and to be crazy and to be hungry. And this is like the birthplace of what we call Judaism today, of rabbinical Judaism, because there was a person, like the founder of rabbinical Judaism, his name is Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, or Ribaz for short. And he fled the town, and you weren't allowed to leave. They would kill you if you tried to leave. He fled it in a coffin. According to the story, it's a real person. Academically, it's a real person. And this is a story, but it's a meaningful founder story. So he fled the city in a coffin. And according to the story in the Talmud, he met the Roman general. He was able to flee the guards in the coffin. His students kind of helped him. He was a Jewish teacher. And he met a Roman general that was laying siege to the city. And the Roman general asked him, what should I do? And he compared Jerusalem to a barrel of honey with a snake in it. And this is like the foundational act of Judaism. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he said, give me Yavne and its sages. Yavne is the name of a place. And this is where he started his very small school. And there's some criticism about that. It's sometimes seen as a sort of betrayal, as a sort of saying to the Romans, okay, go for it, destroy the city. And we can talk about it morally, but in effectual terms, what it led to was the founding of Judaism. So Yavne and its sages, through a long process, they created the Mishnah, and that led to the Talmud, and that led to the Zohar, the founding book of Kabbalah. There are earlier books, but this is considered like the main one, and then later to Hasidism and to all of Judaism. And there's a direct line between their work and, I would say, Jewish vibe today. One of the things that kind of floored me, just really floored me, I'm not exaggerating, when I started to seriously read the Talmud, was how close these guys were to Larry David. The vibe, the argumentativeness, the pettiness. I don't know if people know, but the Talmud is about very, very petty stuff. Extremely petty stuff. It begins, brachot, blessings, with a ridiculous discussion of when is evening time. And this, with really just a slight touch and more humor, this can be an episode in Seinfeld. Because they go on for 4 or 5 pages. When is evening time? And some people say, well, it depends on the color of the sky. Some people say, well, it's about human behavior at evening time. Others say it's the time in the temple where they change the guards. So what we call Judaism today was created by that small group. And what they chose, like the main sacred text being studied by Jews today, it's not the Old Testament. It's not the Torah, it's the Talmud. And I study from it every day. And I studied it with the girls. And it's a ridiculous text. It's funny. It's stupid. I mean, I'm saying it with love, obviously.
Yeah.
And I think one of Judaism's kind of greatest achievements is a continuation of this vibe. Because you can really take Larry David and change not a lot. And he very naturally, I can see him in their Beit Midrash, in their school of study, arguing all day about extremely petty stuff. So, okay, how does this help us with the killing in Gaza? Okay, let's.
Yeah.
And it directly relates to it. Because starting with the destruction of the temple, the central metaphor for Judaism became exile. And starting again from the very first page of the Talmud doesn't really have a first page, but the one where you traditionally started. Another attribute of the Talmud is it's written as if you've already read all of it. It's this funny thing. So the exile thing. The exile, and they're using the destruction of the temple as a sort of a central metaphor. And they were extremely sophisticated because they didn't want the temple rebuilt. And you know, the year 70, when it was destroyed, there was a lot of Jewish sects that wanted the temple rebuilt. This is obviously not long after Christ. There were a lot of Christian sects, a lot of Jewish sects, the Essayins in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And they didn't want the temple set. And what they did the sort of best, longest funeral in history for the temple. And they said, well, look, here's what's going to happen. We're going to take these people, we're going to take the Jews, and from now on, you're all priests. It's a kingdom of priests, mamlechet kohanim. We're going to take the rules of the priest in the temple, and even earlier rules from the Torah. And from now on, everyone's got to do it. Everyone, and to this day, Jewish law is based on the purity laws that were practiced in the temple and earlier. And they give great honor to the temple, right? And they base a lot of Judaism in it. But at the same time, they're making sure it stays buried. They're making sure it stays in the ground. It's this really sophisticated move. So they begin to explore this thing of being in exile, of humans being in exile. And it's a great exploration. And from that first text, from the Talmud, already they're changing God. They're changing God, because if you look at the God of the Torah, of the Old Testament, which I feel a connection to, yeah, but famously, he can get quite angry and he can get quite frustrated. And I didn't understand it until I was a parent. And then I understood a little bit more, because you can read the text in all sorts of ways. You can read God as sort of very angry and, just killing tens of thousands of people at a whim. But also you can see the Israelites there just refusing everything, just continuously refusing every opportunity to and it doesn't matter how many miracles you show them. It doesn't matter how many, we would say, kind of supernatural experiences they view. They still it says, "Kshei oref," the back of their necks is hard. They don't change easily. So already, again, the first page of the Talmud, it says about that God, it says that he wakes up every night and he cries. He cries, he kind of yells out because of the destruction of the temple. Mm-hmm. So if you can see the myth of God in the Torah and that new God, he's already much more emotional, much more connected to himself, I would say. And it's still himself at that stage. So thus began like a 1500 years project. Talmud is around 5th century, is around the 5th century, and Mishnah, which is what was before the Talmud, is a 2nd century, 3rd. So thus begins the great softening of the Jewish people. And then the next phase is Kabbalah. The next phase is the Zohar. The Zohar is a real, nothing goes as hard as the Talmud. Nothing is as crazy as that text, but the Kabbalah really tries. The Zohar comes pretty close. Yeah. So what the Zohar does, it says, okay, so what's the one thing that's sacred to Jews? What's the one thing that never changes, that you're not supposed to sort of ask questions about? And that's the oneness of God, right? Jews famously, there's no Jesus, there's no Muhammad, there's no saints. God is just this one thing. And the Zohar goes straight for that and dismantles God using Gnosticism, not just to the 10 Sfirot, but to like 10,000 different things. 10,000 different things that have these interactions between them, these complex interactions between them, saying, oh, that's God. And then amazingly, that becomes like official Jewish metaphysics. I think different from some religions, even just the Abrahamic religions, Judaism does have official metaphysics, which were kind of kept ever since the 12th, 13th century of the Zohar, and that's Kabbalah. So God, that started out as this, tough, I don't know if tough dude or moody dude in the Torah, although I said I also connect to him, became in the Talmud this thing that cries at night with the pain of us humans. And then the Talmud, first of all, breaks him up. And also, crucially, he puts her inside. God is now also her. And one of the things that floored me about the Zohar when I first read it, it's mostly about her. It's mostly about her, not about him.
Would that be?
Yeah, the Shekhinah, exactly. The Shekhinah, the feminine side of God. And it goes into great kind of lengths of kind of describing her, although like the Talmud, it's not like the 15 principles of Judaism, the 15 principles of Kabbalah. It's all bizarre stories. It's all people mostly walking around and then kind of interacting with each other, and then miraculous things happen. And you got to kind of work and understand God out of that. So we're seeing another softening. Now also the feminine side. And then in that retellings, and crucially, by the way, this came from Gnosticism. It came from somewhat outside of Judaism. And at the same time, there's a great sage named Maimonides, Rambam, who was really, really into the Greeks. like other people of his time who got the Greek text through sort of the Muslim civilization, through Arabic translations. And he was really,
right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And he incorporated that about the same time into Judaism. So now Judaism became this Talmud thing, plus Gnosticism, plus, Greek philosophy translated very beautifully into kind of Jewish language. And then the next and final stage, and then we're getting back to Gaza and today, is Hasidism. Hasidism, which is like 18th century, they took Kabbalah, which kind of developed throughout this time, and they said, okay, so it's not just about physics. They very much went to, as without, so within. And all these divine forces and all this beautiful physics that's being described of how the universe works is actually also inside of us. And they started this project of matching the different sphirot, matching those different forces into the things that we feel. And that was a huge jump, because if I look today, what's useful for me? If I think about the teachings of Michal, my teacher, who is very adamant of real stuff that you feel, not just empty words, then this is something I can use. And I can kind of meet in myself those things. So this was Hasidism. And now we come to the state of Israel, which in kind of my retelling, this was supposed to be, in that sense, by the way, I want to be honest, I'm kind of meeting the theology of the far right. I'm saying this was supposed to be a meeting of Jews and the earth. After being in exile for so many years, the better version of what happened would have been a meeting between Jews and earth, a grounding of sorts. And that's not what happened. Something different happened. And you can see in 20th century Judaism, there are some rabbis felt that. Some rabbis, there's a rabbi who's he lost his family in the Holocaust. He had 11 kids and his wife, and they all died, and he was kind of miraculously saved. And there's a speech by him. There's actually an audio version of it in Yiddish, where he talks about the state of Israel. And it's just beautiful story. It's his interpretation or commentary of a story by a former, like a Hasidic rabbi, Rabbi Nachman of Braslav. And he says, he talks about his existence in the state of Israel. And he says, look, it's much worse. It's much worse than before, because it's as if I've been invited to my dad's house after my dad kicked me out 2,000 years ago. This is just his words. My dad kicked me out of my home, and I was not allowed to come back for 2,000 years. And now I was allowed to come back, but he keeps me out in the yard. He won't let me in. And in the style of those rabbis, which are really the last great rabbis, I think, without kind of, I don't want to insult anyone, there are some great rabbis today, but these people really knew the art that Michal is talking about, of making things real, of bringing their pain into it. And he said it's much worse, because I can see my dad's house, I can see it, but I'm outside, I'm still in exile. And he's crying like mad. He's crying like mad. They used to cry a lot. So, okay, so we find ourselves here now. And I think it's quite possible that it's too late, in a sense. I'm not sure this meeting between Jews and the earth can happen in Israel now. We may have made too many mistakes along the way. But here's the good thing. There are people like Maoz Inon and others, very small groups, that have some sort of an in into what I'm describing. Like, just to mention like a few names, there's a professor of consciousness in Reichman University. She's the head of the Consciousness Study Center. Her name is Nava Lavit Binun. And she has a small group of people who understand what we're talking about. And then there's another professor, a professor of Kabbalah, named Chaviva Pedia, also a woman. And by the way, the grandchild of a great known Kabbalist, Yehuda Pedia. And she also has her small groups. And then there's Maoz Inon. And Maoz Inon is no rabbi. He was this entrepreneur. He built great hostels in Israel. They're called Abraham hostels. And I stayed in them more than once. Special places. If anyone ever gets to Israel, there's one in Jerusalem, there's one in Tel Aviv, and there's one in Nazareth. And And I gotta say, I haven't thought about it until now, but at some difficult points in my life where I couldn't or wouldn't sleep at home, that's where I went to.
Mhm.
Special places.
Yeah.
So even before October 7th, this guy had something. But he was an entrepreneur. And then October 7th, both his parents were murdered. Um, like that's bad enough, but I won't go into the details. But it took the government like 10 months to ID his mother's body. Like really bad stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and and he heard the news, he and his family, on October 7th. And even though it wasn't clear because of what I just said, they weren't sure the state of the bodies were in. They weren't sure. His family immediately understood that it's real, and they immediately went into Shiva, into the Jewish mourning ritual. And Maoz, and that's probably part of his secret or special thing, just disintegrated, just met the catastrophe head on. And he described it. He just disintegrated completely, which is probably the right reaction for a human being when met with such a thing. And then the second night, he had like uh, a dream or a vision of a land covered in blood being cleansed by tears. That was the second night. And then the fourth night, very, very quickly, he had what people, who know your work would call like a classic orb experience. He had a ball of light showing up in his bedroom, and he was completely awake this time. His partner, his wife, was kind of sleeping next to him. He was completely awake. And the orb kind of just showed up there. And Maoz was afraid that, what are you? What is this? And and the orb said, I'm the Star of Peace. And Maoz kind of, in his way, very quickly processed this and says, okay, so what do you want? I said, you know what I want. The kind of the star said, the star.
Mm-hmm.
And there are other details of this encounter, like all these sorts of encounters, they're actually like these infinite wells of meaning.
Yeah.
But even if we stop here, the way that Maoz described it, and I believe him because that's how he operates, from that point on, things were clear to him. And things were clear to him that this is his calling. And I think the next day or the day afterwards, he received a call from a Palestinian friend whom he said he didn't really know very well before that. And the Palestinian friend, and this already, of course, things in Gaza were taking shape, and already there were bombings. But this Palestinian friend, whom I always calls my forgiveness teacher, kind of consoled him. And then they went on this joint journey of, of creating peace, of doing peace. And Maoz describes how we turned it into kind of actionable items, like a plan. And he started rallying people around him. And he created this group, which I don't want to, overemphasize its size or something like that. But again, they got to the Pope, they got to very high up people in Germany, they got to other high people, which, you can't really talk about, but already having like a real impact. Whatever those arm shipments were, he stopped them. So much like 2,000 years ago, we have these small groups with Nava, the professor, and Chaviva and Maoz. And, I try in my kind of way to do something. These small groups, which are probably too small to stop the carnage right now, especially long run. But maybe we can take this myth and we can take our pains and we can take this trauma and start weaving this connection like between Jews and Earth. But like you said, it's a universal thing. Everyone, we are all feeling disconnected. So now I want to go back to your original question, if that's okay.
Yeah, man, absolutely.
The we here. How do you understand the we here? Where does this take you? I don't know. What do you think, man?
I think that there is a intoxicating power behind myth in people's lives, whether or not they buy into the anomalous phenomenon kind of reality. And I think we can look back through history at various points where the operative myth has been weaponized by the culture that it resides in and turned into an engine for some sort of social project that could be really destructive or really positive. I mean, I think in the United States there have been some positive myths. The American Dream thing, which I think
Mm,
for a lot of generations was the impetus for a lot of forward or upward mobility in society, and I think that that's become eclipsed by a lot of economic circumstances. But that was a really powerful kind of archetypal myth in America for a while. There have been destructive ones like Manifest Destiny, where we're meant to take over the whole continent, and the people who are in our way, we're just going to either eliminate or, relocate. Um, Nazi Germany was an
mm,
example of a country that took myth, Nordic myths, and weaponized them into an occultish kind of reservoir of power that channeled deeply held disaffection on the part of its population and turned it into an army of, death and destruction and hatred. And that
hmm
was very powerful. Uh, as you're describing now, the Israelis are in this position where they are operating under the pressure of these myths, and how that's going to unfold is up to, the Israeli people and the rest of the world in terms of how they react to that myth and what they offer up in its place, how we choose to inspire ourselves as people. There was a psychologist who I always, every time I want to reach for his name, I forget it. I forget it. But um, he basically wrote about the states of consciousness that people have, and they're progressing through them, he thinks.
mm,
And there is Ken Wilber is his name.
mm,
And he talks about how different people are at different stages of consciousness. And when people are at different stages, there's almost no realistic communication that occurs between them. And a lot of people are stuck in a mythico magical kind of state of consciousness where they think in terms of tribalism and, the symbology of their personal or cultural mythos. And at the end of this evolutionary process, there's a holistic kind of um, transcultural awakening that he thinks is going to happen, sort of the height of human consciousness, which is a very holistic place. But it doesn't reject all of the stages that come before. It
mm,
includes all of them.
mm,
And it's,
mm.
I think it's something that humans are evolving towards. But there are very few people who are actually there, and the people who are there aren't necessarily out, marketing, which is how everything is spread these days. But it's interesting. I think that realistically, the world has to realize that most people are affected and led by that kind of thinking, and that there is real symbolic power in it. And I think it relates to the archetypes of the universe. I think that there's something more than just metaphoric about these ideas. And whether we're creating them or following them is sort of a question that we can put aside, because they have operative strength no matter which side of the argument you want to take. But what is the new myth that is going to raise us all above these
Mm.
old conflicts?
Yeah,
Um, and that's
yeah,
where we're at in this moment, I think, is trying to construct that. And I think that, you mentioned Gnosticism, and again, as a throwback, there's this idea now, the Gaia hypothesis, which I kind of mentioned earlier, that there is a planetary being that's made up of all of us. It kind of harkens back to Sophia among the Gnostics,
yeah.
which resonates with Shekinah. I mean, there's this idea that there is um, you know, an identity within the earth, and that it is actively trying to communicate with us, whether that's through daimonic relationships or our what we call our, inner voice, our higher selves. I think that all of those things may well be connected, and something is birthing right now, you know.
hmm hmm
And
hmm
I think that we all have to kind of play midwives to what this idea is without trying to force it. Um, but time is getting short. We have all these crises, all these, destructive energies have been unleashed, and we need to act quickly in order to produce stability. And I don't know how that gets done other than having these kinds of conversations and, loving one another. Not in the lovey-dovey sense, but in the empathetic, we're all connected kind of sense. Yeah, so that's what I'm getting from what you're saying about, the Jewish people and their traditions, how that's mirrored in some ways by other cultures, and that, I mean, right when you mentioned it early on in this conversation, that sense of exile, it's like, of course, that's what we're all feeling. That's that like ache that is so human that we try to find different ways of addressing. And our culture right now, at least, mine, is focused on shopping or the internet in order to fill that gap. And that is not going to work long term as it's not worked up until now. And so something needs to give. And I don't know how we get there, but I think that you are onto something and an important voice in this whole conversation.
Thank you, James. I really appreciate it. And can I say something about that?
Oh,
My
please. Yeah,
experience
no,
of
that's
it?
what I'm doing. Yeah, offer it up. Yeah.
So I'm going to be the stubborn Jew now. And
Okay.
I'm not going to go down the universalist path. I'm going to offer something else. And like a story, like much better than an idea or a concept. But let me just preface it by saying something a little bit silly. If we imagine aliens coming down here and we want to meet them and we're sending like a team to meet them, I wouldn't want this team to look all the same. I wanted like, Jews in their garb and different religions in their garb and different people and looking different and dressing different and being kind of weird in different ways. I love that tapestry, let's say.
Yeah.
So, so in that sense, I'm not a universalist. And the things that you talk about, like Gaia or Shekhinah, okay, so I'll just tell us, and it's like an experiencer story. So we're coming up on the holiday of Sukkot, and Sukkot, last year, Sukkot is after the tents in the supposed tents in the desert where the Israelites stayed in while coming to Israel. And what you do is you build this small hut, and there's a lot of very complex, very Larry David laws that I ignore most of them, and some of them I do follow. And how you build that hut. You're supposed to see the stars. There are all sorts of rules, and you stay there for about a week. It depends, but you eat some of your meals there. Some people sleep there, etc. So let's Sukkot. I'm right now in my home in Givatayim, and there on the porch, I built, or my mother mostly built, if I'm honest, a sukkah, like this thing. And she built it with the girls, with my daughters, and it was nice, and they kind of made it nice, and we put up, all sorts of cute little things that girls at that age do. And then very kind of absent-mindedly, I kind of read the prayer from the book, the appropriate prayer. And then afterwards, again, pretty absent-mindedly, not a lot of intent, but a little bit, the way that Kabbalah views this holiday, there's a big thing in this holiday about visitors. And with Kabbalah, there's something called higher visitors. The ancestors come to visit. And there's an Aramaic prayer that has to do with that. And I read it, again, without really planning for it. It's not usually what I do. And I read that prayer like out loud. I prayed the prayer. Okay. And then, okay, it was late. I put the girls to sleep. My mother left, and I went to bed. And I felt really, really lonely that night. Really. I felt kind of far from my family. I felt far from my partner at the time. And I sort of fantasized of a better relationship with everyone, and how would that look like with a lot of details. How would they feel, being held by those different relationships, and what would that look like on a day-to-day level? And then the way that I remember it, I kind of fell asleep, and I kind of woken up, or I almost fell asleep, and I did something weird. I kind of prayed to God, which is not that weird for me. But the weird thing was that I called God's source, which is not something that I do. I hear the term in American UFO circles. That's my connotation for it, source. And I applied to source, and I kind of asked, and I was in the pain. Just help me with this. Help me with this, man. Come on. And I was in this hypnagogic state before sleep. And I fell asleep, and in my dream, I was here. I was in the home, and it was Sukkot. And a couple came in, an elderly couple, a small woman in a red, she was wearing red. She was, I think, somewhere between 60 and 70. She was wearing like Orthodox clothes. She had the hat, and she held this cake, but the cake was weird. It was kind of pixelated. And I remember her husband, he had this worn out shirt, this faded polo shirt, and he was kind of balding. I don't remember his face. And then they come in, and then a whole bunch of people come after them, and they go into the sukkah. And I'm also in the sukkah, and in the dream, it's kind of a very real me. I'm kind of nervous. I didn't really invite those people as far as I'm concerned. And they're coming in, and they're sitting right in front of me, three of them. The couple is sitting behind me, and the three of them are sitting in front of me, and a couple of others are going to another room, to sort of a back room that doesn't exist in the physical reality. And they're all connected, they're all related, they're kind of a family or a tribe. I kind of gather that. And the people sitting in front of me, they had glasses, but like a soda bottle, like you couldn't see their eyes. The glasses were very thick. And I have a thing with eyes. I'm an experiencer myself. I have earlier, mostly one childhood experience, which was quite dramatic, of entity encounter. And I remember being very, very afraid of the eyes in that encounter. And so they came here, and their eyes were covered. And the way these things go, I thought they were neighbors that I didn't in the dream. I thought these are neighbors that I don't know. And I kind of asked, kind of a little bit nervously, "Oh, you're living here. What floor are you from?" And we have 3 floors here in this building. And they said 4th floor, which is kind of symbolic. And then the magic happened. Then they didn't really say anything. Maybe they mumbled a little bit. But the 3 in front of me, who also had worn out clothes, they had this really neutral, with a slight positive vibe energy. They were calm. And I remember being kind of nervous, but really feeling their calmness. They were calm. And I don't really, kind of like the sound of waves. I don't really remember them talking with each other, but the vibe was something like that. And it was very powerful. And it felt like directly related to what it's not what I asked for. What I asked of God was kind of to be embraced, to be held, this kind of really anxious thing. And I didn't get that. Mm-hmm. Instead, I got this tribe sitting there, being very relaxed. And this woman was the leader. This woman, I knew that she brought the cake. She was the leader. And I woken up, and through Robin's training and the training that I got, I understood this is of significance. And again, this was last year. And so I wrote it down, and I talked about it with people. And I'm not comparing myself, but I accepted this guidance. I accepted this as something that I want to strive for. Mm-hmm. And this thing that Jacques Vallée and others understood about these experiences, that they're not using language. Now I know how that feels. Now I know what's the feeling that I need when I feel that exile thing, mm-hmm. when I feel detached and lonely. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't like building the 3rd temple. It was this calm thing. It was this relaxing that, and I'm thinking of 1500 years of Jewish history. And I want the 2 vibes to meet. I want this anxious vibe of the Talmud and of Larry David to meet. That sort of calm vibe. And I think something very productive, a sort of 3rd wave, can come out of it. Mm-hmm. And this is honestly what I'm working for. And ever since that dream, it completely transformed how I teach Torah, what I aim for, this sort of vibe. And to me, this offers a myth where it's not only, it doesn't feel like a compromise between Western liberal values and traditional Jewish values. It feels very Jewish to me. It's not a coincidence that this woman was Orthodox, and their whole vibe was, it felt tribal. It felt kind of local. Mm-hmm. And I do think it has something to do with her, with Shekhinah.
Mm-hmm.
But then if you're still with me, there's a twist. There's a twist, because the way that the Jews treat Shekhinah, they say, okay, this is still a part of God. There's still the male part.
Mm-hmm.
And the work of the Kabbalist is a work of marriage or of sex. You know, it's a very sexual thing, Kabbalah. But to bring the two together. And in the Kabbalistic myths, I would say there are two types of people. There are people who are from the side of the bride and from the side of the groom. And the bride is reality. According to Kabbalah, everything is feminine. The whole world, everything that's existing is feminine. And they were kind of, highly sexual straight men. And it was very productive for them to understand the world as female, because it made them lust after the world. And the Kabbalah, as early as the Zohar and earlier, they want to bring the two together. And there are some people who are from the side of the groom, and I'm very much from the side of the bride. I'm very much from the side of this world. And in Kabbalah, this is related to Aaron, Moses' brother. Mm-hmm. Moses is from the side of the groom. Moses is very close to the light. He's very close to the things that mystics experience, this clear white light that's kind of energizing all over reality. And Aaron is a translator. All he does is translate. He kind of takes this overpowering light, which according to canonical Kabbalah would destroy the world if it's not properly kind of entered into the vessel. Yeah. And you want to bring the two together. You want to bring the two together. And the Kabbalists are very, I think because they have Jewish law, because they have some things that are kind of stopping them, in everything else they can be quite extreme. So in order to get the bride and the groom together, and they write this explicitly, they sleep with the bride themselves to get God jealous. To make God jealous, you sometimes, whatever it takes, get the job done, whatever it takes. And more kind of maybe conservatively, there's a lot about making the bride more beautiful, mm-hmm. kind of helping her fix out. And the reason I think this is relevant, because when you go into Kabbalah, you start seeing kind of different roles and seeing where you instinctively kind of feel where you are. So that's where I feel like I belong. That's sort of my role there.
I'm interested. How do you see, all of this connecting to the other extant mystical traditions? Do you see, like you mentioned the universalist, like you don't want to pivot in that direction. How do you see Kabbalah, I'm sorry to mispronounce it, relating to other mystical traditions or ideas, or other religions as they relate to Judaism? Is there a truth, or is it all sort of, how do you see that? And does that make sense to you?
Sure.
Basically, is someone who is not Jewish but has a mystical tradition just as holy in a sense than as people following okay, so how would you describe that?
I think one useful metaphor is the Rome metaphor, that all roads lead to Rome. And I think, again, from an academic point of view, we can start kind of comparing different mystics. And they talk about the same thing. They talk about this divine light. They talk about, of course, it's a very broad generalization, but this pure energy that in Kabbalah it's called chesed, loving kindness. In other traditions it's called something else, but it's like in the walls. It's like electricity. It makes the world go round. And everyone talking about it, like all the different traditions. But I think the journeys towards the destinations are different. Different roads are different. And if it's, like the cliche goes, if it's about the journey and not the destination, it does matter what road you choose, especially I think in this life. Maybe in the next life, not so much. Mm-hmm. But in this life, all roads lead there. And I think when we look at it that way, we start looking at the details, which is a very Jewish thing, and saying, okay, so for example, if we look at some, and I'm going to overgeneralize here, but if we look at some, let's say, Indian tradition, you can see how intimate they are with this consciousness thing, how they kind of describe different states in ways that are very beautiful and very ornate, and I would argue cannot be found in Kabbalah, for example. It wasn't the Jewish focus, this sort of very delicate description. So there are different roads to get to Rome. The Jewish Rome is the Jewish Rome. The Jewish way is one road. And we can talk about its characteristics, but this is how I understand it. I do think it makes a difference, and it just shapes you a different way. One thing about Judaism is a lot of being shaped by ritual, and day after day, you're being shaped a certain way if you follow that stuff.
Yeah.
So that's how I think about it.
Okay. What do you think of the way that the Kabbalah has been abducted, for lack of a better term, by other approaches like Christian Kabbalah or even occult Kabbalah? Do you think that those are legitimate approaches, or is it offensive in any way? I mean, because a lot of people have co-opted that notion, and yeah.
Yeah, I don't feel like I have some sort of special right to it or something like that. Like everyone can do their own thing. What I'm thinking is, so what makes my Kabbalah acceptable for me versus others? And this is where a lot of the teachings from Michal and Robin comes in handy, because the reason that my description of Kabbalah is real and is because it's real for me. But okay, there's this very special Jewish game that your question, that's what's the heart of it. Because what did the Jews do after the destruction of the temple? There are different approaches, right? There's Christianity, Islam came afterwards, and what the Jews did was something very bizarre. Again, the Talmud and this Yochanan ben Zakkai dude, they're kind of the pioneers of that. They said, essentially, academically, they kind of started a new religion. When you read the Talmud and you see how far it is from the Torah, it's really far. But there's a trick. Everything in Judaism to this day, if you speak with ultra-Orthodox people, if you look at marketing campaign for ultra-Orthodox people to sell whatever, Coca-Cola, it has to be coached in the language of the old. It has to be justified in the language of the old. So to give just one example, the sages institute 3 prayers a day, right? And there's an afternoon prayer. And then one very important sage, Rabbi Yochanan, like a personal favorite of mine, it's like a DC universe, like a Marvel universe. There are different sages and you can connect with different people. It's cool. So he said, oh, there's this saying in the Torah about how Isaac went out into the field. And from this, I understand that there needs to be afternoon prayer. Now, it's not connected. It's not logically connected. But there's this alchemy going on, this very weird thing where you take your deeply subjective experience. Much like Larry David, they were possessed by their own subjectivity. Jewish sages are very much about the subjectivity. And for example, in that way, they're very different from, let's say, the modern conception of spirituality. They did not let go of their ego, at least not on the face of it. They were very much... And people argue in the Talmud, saying, but the verse says something else. But the alchemy happens when you really believe it, when it's real for you, and then they started this weird religion where it's all commentary upon commentary upon commentary. My own work is really just a very humble commentary on those who came before me, and even just commentary on Robin, on Michal, my teachers. I'm merely interpreting, and I'm not marketing here. This is how it feels to me. But at the same time, it's my own fully subjective experience. But I pronounce it in a way that's, it's like my whole work, what I do all day is kind of finding things, like finding out what I'm feeling and then finding it in the sacred text. And kind of the more references I find, the happier I am. Yeah. The better the commentary is.
Yeah.
And you create this structure, it was called like a temple in time, where you go back, you go 18th century, 16th, 14th, 12th, and until the Torah, like 3,000 years or 2,600, depending on your interpretation. And you're seeing yourself, like, for example, Isaac, if we already mentioned him. Mm-hmm. today I teach the tree of life, which is like the basic model in Kabbalah. Like I teach like a muscular kind of like a startup version of it because it's very complex. So I chose what I think is most important right now. But in Judaism, Isaac is sort of again, Judaism doesn't have saints, but he's kind of the patron saint of post-trauma, Isaac. And this whole edifice of Abrahamic religion is built on this one post-traumatic child whose dad tried to kill him, Abraham, as you know. And and as I was doing some of the early work with Robin, where you find your guides, so he showed up. He was the first guy to show up. And this is like in traditional readings, he knows about the pain, Isaac. And Isaac helps me when all the others fail. And then amazingly, I found a Talmudic passage that says it. And most of Jewish tradition, it's about Abraham, it's about Jacob, his son. And Isaac is kind of this middle child. He's stuck in the middle. But there's this one beautiful passage in the Talmud that kind of quotes Isaiah. And they say, look, in the future, we're going to turn to Abraham and it's not going to help us. And we're going to turn to Jacob and he's not going to help us. And the one that's going to help us is Isaac. Because Isaac is connected in Kabbalah to strengths, to trauma, to boundaries, to saying no, those sorts of things. Not the mystical light, not the all goodness light, but this thing. And once I had like an authentic connection there, that's enough. That's enough. I don't need any more kind of justifications. I have the authentic connection. I have all those sacred texts to work with. And today I teach people. And, I worked with at-risk youth, for example, from that stuff. And people connect to it, I think.
Yeah. That's lovely.
Thanks.
And I think that that's an interesting part about my own practice is trusting your own subjectivity. Because I'll have an experience and then I immediately interrogate it as, well, is that my imagination? Am I fudging this? Is this wishful thinking? Or how much of this is real? But if I engage my subjectivity and allow it, give myself permission to exist in that space and have legitimate experiences, then I get the benefit of the transcendental moment. And I don't want to say it doesn't matter whether it's quote unquote real or not, but it doesn't in terms of its effect on me. And that's what I'm after anyway, right? So I think knowing to trust your own subjectivity, especially in this kind of work, is super important. And maybe stop at making generalizations about how your subjectivity may apply to other people, but believing in your own experiences and allowing them to take root seems like the most important thing.
I think, first of all, that's beautiful, and it takes a ton of work. For me, still today, and again, this has to do with childhood trauma and self-denial. That's huge. That's a huge. I think there's a Christian prayer about dropping the cross of self-denial. And I think it's everyday work. Like every day, that's still what I do. Robin helps me with it. Michal helps me with it. The voice that kind of shuts down our own experience is so strong, is so loud. And a lot of times you talk about it in the culture. We have this voice in the culture, right? The culture tells us that our subjective experience isn't real. And also some of us have this psychologically inside us, this self-canceling thing. Yeah, it doesn't always work. Maybe most of the time it doesn't, but when it does work, when the work I also see it externally, it's beautiful. Like some of the best sort of moments of whatever, the last year, or like that.
Wonderful, man. That's about all I have for you, but that was a fantastic discussion. Went to places I don't typically go, and I appreciate that. So thank you.
Thank you, James. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate the opportunity and your honesty. And I gotta say, that's what I'm feeling, your love. Really beautiful.
Amen. Same to you.